Hey, everybody. So I've put out the anger, repression, and inside out path, that video. And I may have released the sadness, repression, and inside out path video, or I may not have at this point. I'm just doing another video to help some people who have questions. And here's the main point. I can see that people are watching the videos and resonating, but some of you are not connecting the dots. And it's going to be a major miss for you around this work. Certain insights that I'm sharing, for example, in the anger, repression, and inside out path video, those are things that you don't want to leave here. You don't want to leave as just an understanding. It's just not enough. Not even close, actually, in my view. Yeah, it's not. So to understand these things is just the beginning. It doesn't really bring the real transformation. There are a lot of people, just go on social media and you'll see them, who know a lot about trauma. Do you think they've healed? No, some of them, but you're going to know the ones that are healed because of how they show up and because of where it's coming from, the message. It's an energy, it's an energetic thing. You can tell the difference if you pay attention to people, between people who understand things and people who grok them, those who really directly experience them. So I noticed that there are some people watching these videos who are just doing the understanding thing. They're not doing a lot of experiential work here. I don't want to cater to that group of people because there's so many other people that are doing the work. I'd rather just talk to you. But so I think that some of these questions this week came from the group of people that are either because you don't know how, but I would be surprised if it's because you don't know how, because I've shown you several times, is that you're just resistant to it. So can we park here today? And there's going to be an objective to this video that I want you to keep watching this video until this sinks in your experience. I mean that. I've never said that before, but like if you leave this video still not understanding and grokking that your deficiency story is connected straight to with your repression, then just watch the video again and keep watching it and doing the exercises until it's clear in your experience. Not that you're done with repression or that you're cured or healed, but that you clearly see without a doubt that your deficiency story is there as a result of repression and trauma. Direct link. Can we do that? Are you ready? Oh, by the way, this is what if I've used the term somatic testing, it's the word that I use when we're doing inquiry for the purpose of discovery. So we may or may not sit through some of these inquiries. I may give a little bit of space for that, but it's mostly about discovery, because in discovery is what changes our practice. If we don't take time to discover, for example, the programming that's hidden in the body, to really see what that is, then when we go to inquire, that programming is going to push us away from it, because that's the I have to stay safe thing. Do you guys hear that piece of it? That's a really important piece here too, is we have to discover the nature of that programming and what it's really saying and what it is, because that's the programming that's leading the bypass. So if we are not aware of it, then we're going to go, we'll go into areas that are safe, because that conditioning, not being aware of it, will be directing us in those safer ways. So for example, we discover a primary repression, right? In the beginning of the inside out path, we want to discover that in the beginning because that's the thing driving the avoidance. If I repress anger, then that's going to be driving things, right? It determines who I get into a relationship with and whether I stay. It determines whether I have certain diseases or not. It's behind my triggers and shadows, addictions. So we want to know early, and that's through somatic testing. So you wouldn't, like, the first time you Well, like the Are You Repressing Emotion video that I've done, that's somatic testing. We're not actually going through the inquiry. We're just seeing if there's evidence of anger repression or sadness. So that would be a part of the inside out path that I would ask everybody to do that video. Are you repressing emotion? Take this litmus test. YouTube video of mine. Search Scott Kiloby, Are You Repressing Emotion? So that's a litmus test, or that's a somatic testing where I didn't take you into inquiry. We're going to do some of that today, different kind of somatic testing to link up the connection between the deficiency story and the primary repression. Now, if you're watching this video and you don't know what your primary repression is, you can still hang out here with me, but I'm going to ask you to take that question very seriously on the inside out path, and don't get too deep into KI without naming that. Because basically, without naming and knowing what the primary repression is, that, remember, without discovering that, then it drives everything, because that's what you don't want to feel. So it'll drive you away from any practice that would take you into that. It would drive you away from any teachers or practices that might help you heal that trauma, because it's trying to protect you. If you go to certain practices, you might go to practices that are really safe, because that conditioning is running the show. So many people have gotten interested in nervous system regulation because they have trauma, but that many forms of that nervous system regulation do not penetrate through the conditioning, show the emptiness of the trauma. They just regulate it. So some people are going to nervous system regulation because of the need to feel safe. So that conditioning runs the whole thing. The trauma does. But more specifically, I have to hold myself back. Something about myself, emotion or otherwise, is behind it. Now, how do you discover for yourself? Because it's not enough to sit and listen to Scott Kiloby say it, right? Secondhand knowledge is no interest. And more information, right? We want insight. We want direct seeing. There's a difference between having a conviction in your direct experience and having a conviction here. When we have a conviction here, like when we're identified with an idea, we have to defend it because we're still scared, because we're not opening up to our emotional experience. So we have to land on certain ideas and then defend those. That's coming from the same trauma, that where we're not embodied. Here, I'm asking you to look at that differently. Not here. First here, and then in experience. When you have firm conviction and experience, nobody can take that away from you. When you are embodied and you know yourself, you know your experience, that's when you don't have to rely on this. This is a totally different way here of understanding that's in direct experience, not here. Do we have that first? It's not there, okay? Starts there. Now we have to find it in experience. Let's find it. Pull somebody up that's triggered you. You don't have to know why. And by the way, remember anger repressors? Sometimes our trigger is a shutdown. So we don't always get visibly upset. So you don't want to look, some of you, you'll see visibly upset trigger. But for some of you, it'll be more like, I just haven't talked to him in a week, so I don't want to talk to him. Remember, with repression, it's all triggers, both covert and overt. We're responding and reacting from trauma in either situation. Pull that person up, sit with them for a second, feel into the inner body. Rest there for a moment. And remember, not too much when you're triggered, because there's unconsciousness here. Can we pull that into awareness? Start with the boomerang. So whenever you're triggered, use the boomerang first. The boomerang is, what deficiency story is coming up for me? Or what's coming up for me here? I am what? And name it and let it feel true. It's probably something that you've seen before. I'm just going to use the one, I'm unheard. I'm not being heard by my wife. Okay, so there, you have that. Turn right back to mom and dad or VIPs from childhood and stay with that inquiry first. We're just testing somatic. So I want you to reverse that while you're looking at mom and dad and feeling into that energy. Say, I'm completely heard by them. Remember, when I say VIPs, it could be mom and dad. It could be other like bullies or important people. As you pull them up, reverse that first. I'm completely heard. Just to see and feel that this energy that's triggered here with wife currently is essentially the same contraction or energy that's with mom and dad. See that? Just that, and then stop. You don't have to do inquiry here, and I'm asking you not to. I'm asking you because we're just discovering. If you start doing inquiry, you won't hear me because I'm trying to connect dots here. I'm not just trying to lead you in inquiry. The first dot to connect is the deficiency story, the feeling of lack, deficiency, as if there's something missing or something wrong with you that comes up in a trigger, is connected directly to mom and dad. And you don't go here for that. It's all awareness. Remember, you use the mind just to ask a question, but then you watch. So what deficiency story comes up for me? I'm unsafe. Okay, so that's it. Go back to mom and dad. I'm totally safe. No, it doesn't matter what it is. The point being is that the energy that you feel with mom and dad or whatever is really essentially the same energy. Now, what it doesn't show you yet is that that's repression. That's a holding back of self and emotion. Now, how do we discover that? Now that we're with mom and dad, I want you to start with reversing again so that the energy is clearly up. But then right when the energy is up, I want you to go to the reverse inquiry around your primary repression. Here's how it would be if it were me with anger repression. I'll use my husband. Husband says something, trigger. But remember, when we're triggered, we often don't even know the deficiency story because it's unconscious. Why is it unconscious? Because it's connected to the repression, right? We've already said that. So when I'm triggered, maybe the first thing I want to do is see what the identity is here because it's unconscious, connected to trauma. Remember, keep all this in your awareness, become conscious of how this is working for you. Name the story. Let's say I'm unlovable is the identity. I'm going to go back to, let's say, bullies. I would probably go back to bullies. Say the opposite. I'm lovable. Feel the objection. Therefore, I've linked right there. I've linked that my deficiency story, my sense of lack or deficiency that I experience in a current relationship has its roots in past. Body, past relationship. Now that I know that that's linked up, if my primary is anger, I'm going to say, I'm not angry at the bullies. And I'm going to be with whatever comes up, mind and body, right? I also want to add in, I could get angry at the bullies because I want to notice the shutdown. So whatever happens here is telling, even if you shut down here, because what it's telling you is that you're shutting down around a particular emotion. That emotion is the one that's stored in your body. You can feel it. So when you say, I'm not angry, you're not going to feel anger if you're an anger repressor. If you're a sadness repressor and you get to mom and dad and you say, I'm not sad, you're not going to feel sadness. It's going to be that same sort of energy or contraction but remember, you've repressed that emotion. So it's more like a body response or feel that? Stay there though. The more you stay there, the more that you see that as you repeat that, I'm not sad or I'm not hurt and I can show hurt. And the higher skill level you get with that, remember there's skill that you're going to need beyond what I'm showing you to really move through it. But as you continue to stay there and process that, what you'll notice is we're not doing it right now, but if you were to do it later and really stay there with your primary, the energy would start to be transmuted somewhat. You're changing something about the energy of that story, not just the mind part. You're dissolving that by working on the primary. Now, it's not going to be a miracle. It's not like you're going to sit there in one trigger and work through all of your repression. That is not how repression works. It's a lifelong habit. You're doing it all the time. So this is a process that you're in. But I want you to start in the process so that you can link these things up. Because if you don't link these things up, it's a really long process. Because every time you're triggered, it's being driven by the repression. And if you don't see the link, then the repression continues to drive that. Early and inside out, I want you to make this connection. That when your deficiency story is active, go straight to the primary, stay there. And by the way, if you shut down there, remember that's a skill issue. There's nothing wrong with you. It's just that you don't yet have the skill. Just like me, you don't have the skill to move through that. Now, you don't want to stop looking at that because it's the driver. You want to raise your skill level. But you want to do that only after you've linked up the fact that this is driving this, that the deficiency story energy is the repression for mom and dad or whomever. Link it up first. So I would say spend a couple of weeks, actually, if you need to. If this is not something that's a clear insight for you yet, make it a clear insight first before you start doing KI. Because if you don't make this a clear insight, when you're triggered on the deficiency story, you just will not go to the root. And by the way, what I've learned is if we don't go to the root of what's driving it, the root is repression. So basically in every trigger, we just store the emotion. That's the Scott Killaby bypass. Resting or doing light inquiry that doesn't get to repression during a trigger, even though repression was driving it, was the bypass, storing anger constantly from lack of skill. In some ways, looking at the deficiency story only from awareness reinforced the repression because it was missing something completely every time I did it. So it was reinforcing that this is not there. Just the practice itself of like missing the fact that repression drives the deficiency story reinforced the repression because the awareness started to be recognized and the anger was being stored. So it was very deceptive. It looked like clarity, but it wasn't embodied because of that. Learn it and learn this early because it's a game changer. And I'm going to add one more piece to it. It's like an add-on, very much related to this, which is that when you see a shadow, basically any trigger, because with all your triggers, you're going to find either a shadow and or a deficiency story driving it or really involved in it. Shadows are tricky because, like when you're triggered, even if it's not like a strong shadow, you tend to be focused on the other, or I have, or am sometimes. Not so much anymore at all. But early on, when I started doing this work, when I would get triggered, the unconsciousness around the anger would just run everything. So instead of just feeling and expressing all the emotions in some way or processing, I focus on the other person. You need to do this or that, stop doing this or that. And sometimes we have to set a boundary, right? Or maybe we're not able to. But the point being is beyond the boundary thing, that's a whole nother topic, is it I just wasn't processing the repression. Because I didn't see how it was driving the deficiency story. You're going to want to test this out fully because, well, first of all, let me go back to shadow work. The only thing I want to say about shadow work is learn shadow work, like Ken Wilber's 3-2-1 process. In the members area, we have several processes for shadow work. When you have a shadow, that's another good example of like focusing on the other person. Even just when we're triggered, we can do that. Like if you're triggered just on a deficiency story, your consciousness might focus on the other person as a way to hide the repression and everything from you. But shadows are really like that. Because with a shadow in the trigger, you're really focused on the trait of someone else. So I want you to pay attention in any of your triggers where you're really focused on a trait or an emotion, how someone else is showing up. That again, has that quality of I'm hiding the repression from myself. I don't know that the repression is driving it. So by doing the shadow work, you bring it to your side. You see, oh, I have that, whatever that is. And there's a process to it. It takes skill. But once you own it, what I want you to see here, let me give you a process to start seeing it. Here's what I want you to do for now until you become more skilled with shadow work is in a shadow, there's still a deficiency story. And that can take you to the repression. Again, just for discovery purposes, there's probably a more skillful way to do this shadow work than what I'm about to tell you. But this is a good way to test it out, to see how, in fact, the repression is driving the shadow. So just for discovery purposes, I want you to pull somebody up that you have a shadow with, like they have some trait or emotion that bothers you or that you're strongly attracted to. And then I just want you to notice that with a shadow, there's also a sense of deficiency. Like if you see the shadow, like he's really confident, but I'm not. Just whatever that trait is, if it's even if it's a negative trait from somebody, just do a boomerang is the easiest way. Whether it's a positive or a negative shadow, put that person up and say, what deficiency story comes up for me here? Same thing as before. And then go back to your VIPs and reverse that again. So if you're feeling like you're not good enough somehow, that's involved in the shadow, even if you don't know why or how, name it, take that back to your VIPs. Okay, so I'm perfect as I am, or the opposite of that, deficiency story, just for the purpose of seeing that the same energy behind the shadow is there with the people from the past. So there's a link up directly, somatically. You're not going to your mind. You're connecting the fact that they're the same energy with that is there with mom and dad by reversing that deficiency story. Now that you reversed it with mom and dad or your VIPs, and that energy is up, go into your primary here just for discovery purposes. You can come back and look at this on your own. I just want to show it to you first. So you would say, here's the deficiency story with mom and dad. If your primary is anger, I'm not angry at them. If your primary is sadness, you know what to do. Stay there, park there, and process that energy, and then come back. With both shadows or deficiency stories, you just come back and see if the deficiency story is lighter or kind of empty at that point because you went to the root, or if the shadow feels like it's not really there. If you really park at the repression and stay there, you should see a difference in that because they're directly linked. But if you go to the repression and you shut down and you don't have the skill to move through it, chances are when you turn back to that person, you're still going to feel that shadow or that deficiency because they're directly linked. So your work here is not to try to discover a process in which you do one process and the entire ego structure around that is gone. That's the magic thinking. You're in a process in which you have an everyday habit of holding back an emotion. Every single day, every hour, every moment, your system is doing that. Sometimes it's triggered, like with an actual trigger or chronic pain, and sometimes it's not, but it's always going on. It isn't reasonable at all to assume that you're going to go process mom and dad a couple of times and then not have any repression, because the very moment that you're done processing that and mom calls, you don't speak up because it's an ongoing everyday habit. So what I'm trying to get you to do is to bring inquiry to this. For the deep transformation around this, you have to bring inquiry to it and not just do you don't just do a process and then go to sleep around it. See, you do a process and you become conscious of what the driver is and how it shows up when you're on the phone with mom or in different situations. You start bringing that inquiry to life in all those situations, and then stay in that process. Remember that your repression will try to take you out of the process constantly because it's trying to sabotage you. It wants to keep you safe. That's all that it wants, safe. And it is not safe to that system to go to the repression. So it's going to keep shutting you down and producing suffering. And the suffering, frankly, is safer than to the system, than the rage. So the suffering continues because you're trying to stay safe. This is why deep work can't really be based solely on safety. Because that's how we stay feeling deficient and shadowing things out, and chronic pain and disease is because our practices are just not going to the places that scare us. Today is the day for you, if you're ready, to finally link this up and stop running from the emotional repression that's driving the deficiency stories in the shadows. So if you do nothing else, what I'm asking you to do is link this up. Because if you can link this up, everything beyond this will be so much easier to understand, and the practice will be so much easier. Missing this creates a shitload of problems, issues in KI, because somebody's really, really avoiding an emotion, and they're trying to find a way out of that. They're trying to find a bypass. And they'll go back to, let me just look at the deficiency story. Let me just do a bunch of shadow work, completely ignoring the energetic thing that's creating it. Trying still to stay safe. I've seen people, like, they'll start KI work and they'll recognize this is actually what's driving things, and they're scared of it, and they'll just go and start seeking. They'll start just going over here. Let me see if I can find my true nature. Surely if I can find that, I won't have to feel that. See, you have to be really, really aware of what's going on here, how we're running constantly. And when you're doing it, you wouldn't even know it. The sabotage is so unconscious. I want you to pay attention to this, how it's running things. But if you don't go back and link it up now, it's so easy to sabotage when you don't make this link, because the deficiency story is there trying to sabotage everything, trying to keep you safe. It'll just keep doing that. It'll do it with KI. If you don't link this up, the deficiency story will just kind of shut you down, because it has to. You have to remember that its whole purpose is to keep you safe and get you love. And it's going to try to do that at all costs. If it can sabotage KI, it will do that, because what's most important to your system is not freedom or liberation. It's to get love and stay safe. Link it up.